Amber Collins had been awake for 19 hours straight by the time the plane touched down in Seoul, and she still couldn't stop smiling. 19 hours of layovers and turbulence and a cramped economy seat because Junho had insisted, gently, that flying together would draw too much attention from people watching his family's business, and she'd understood. She always understood, and she'd told herself the ache of that understanding was just what it meant to love a man whose last name carried weight in two countries. 27 years old, married 4 months, and finally on her way to meet the mother-in-law she'd only ever spoken to through a translator app and a shaky video call. She smoothed the front of her dress in the airport bathroom mirror, a soft green thing she'd bought specifically for this trip, and studied her own reflection with the critical eye she'd never quite managed to turn off. She was a big woman, always had been, comfortable in her body most days, and less comfortable on days like this one, when she was about to walk into a house belonging to a woman who ran one of Seoul's oldest and most feared crime families and who had never once, in 4 months, asked to meet her before now. Junho's driver picked her up at the curb, bowed without meeting her eyes, and drove her through the city in a black car with windows tinted dark enough that she couldn't tell if anyone outside could see in. She watched Seoul blur past, the neon of Gangnam giving way to the quieter, older streets near the Han River, where the family compound sat behind a gate that looked, from the outside, like nothing more than an unusually private residence. It was, in fact, considerably more than that. Amber knew what her husband was. She'd known before she married him, had made her peace with it the way you make peace with weather you can't control, because the man underneath the title had been patient with her in ways she hadn't expected from someone who ran an empire built on debts and loyalty and things that happened in the dark. He said her name like it was something rare he'd found and didn't intend to lose. He'd stood in a hospital hallway at 3 in the morning once, silent and still, because she'd told him once, offhand, that she hated waiting rooms alone, and he'd remembered. She held on to that memory now, walking up the long stone path toward the house, because the compound itself was intimidating in a way she hadn't braced herself for. Traditional wooden beams beside glass and steel additions, security men posted at intervals who did not look at her so much as through her, and somewhere inside, an old woman who had reportedly never approved of her son marrying an American, let alone a black American woman built like Amber was built. Junho met her at the door. He looked, for a moment, exactly like the man she'd married. Dark suit, dark eyes, the same stillness that had first drawn her to him across a hotel bar in Chicago 2 years ago, and then she noticed something was wrong with his face, some tightness around the eyes that hadn't been there in his last video call. "You made good time," he said and kissed her cheek, brief and dry, nothing like the way he usually greeted her. "I missed you," Amber said, searching his face. "Is everything okay? You look. It's nothing. My mother is anxious to meet you."
Come.
She followed him through a hallway hung with photographs she didn't have time to look at, her stomach tightening with each step, the ordinary nerves of meeting a mother-in-law compounding with something else, something she couldn't name yet but felt gathering at the base of her spine like weather before a storm. That was the moment everything changed, though she wouldn't understand it as that moment until several minutes later, when Junho paused outside a set of sliding doors, took a breath that was too long and too careful for a man about to introduce his wife to his mother, and said, "Whatever you see in there, let me explain it before you speak." "What does that mean?" He didn't answer. He slid the doors open instead, and Amber stepped into a room full of soft afternoon light and darkwood furniture, and saw, standing beside an elderly woman seated regally in a high-backed chair, a young Korean woman in a cream-colored dress, laughing at something, one hand resting with obvious familiarity on the older woman's shoulder. Amber's eyes went, instinctively, helplessly, to that hand. There was a ring on it. Diamond, simple, elegant, catching the light exactly the way an engagement ring catches light when it wants to be seen. The room seemed to tilt slightly under Amber's feet. "Junho," she said quietly, not taking her eyes off the ring, off the hand, off the young woman who had gone still now too, noticing Amber for the first time, her laughter dying in her throat. "What is this?" The old woman spoke first, in Korean, sharp and clipped, and Junho answered her in the same language, low and fast, and Amber stood in the doorway of a house 11,000 miles from anything she recognized as home, watching her husband have an entire conversation about her in a language she didn't speak, while a woman wearing his ring stood 3 feet away, looking at her like she was the intrusion in this room and not the other way around. "Someone needs to explain this to me in English," Amber said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt, which was, she would think later, the only thing that saved her from falling apart completely in that first unbearable minute. The young woman's hand slid off the old woman's shoulder and dropped to her side, but not before Amber saw it clearly one more time, a ring identical in every detail to the one Junho had slid onto her own finger 4 months ago in a courthouse in Chicago, down to the small flaw in the stone's upper facet that the jeweler had pointed out apologetically and Junho had waved off, saying it made the ring theirs and no one else's. It was not identical. It was the same ring, or the same design ordered twice, and either possibility turned Amber's stomach in a way she hadn't known a stomach could turn. "Amber." Junho's voice had gone low, careful. The voice he used with men he was trying to talk down from something. "This is not what you were assuming." "Then tell me what I'm assuming wrong," Amber said. "Because from where I'm standing, your girlfriend is wearing a ring that matches mine, in your mother's living room, on the day you flew me across the world to meet her." The old woman said something else in Korean, sharper this time, and gestured at Amber with an expression that needed no translation at all, irritation, and beneath it, something like satisfaction, as though this scene confirmed a suspicion she'd carried since the day her son first mentioned an American wife. "My mother says you should sit down," Junho said. "That this conversation should happen calmly." "Your mother can say whatever she wants," Amber said, and heard her own voice climbing now, past careful, into something closer to the truth of what she was feeling. "I flew 19 hours to meet your family, Junho. I bought a dress for this. I have spent 4 months defending you to my own mother, who told me marrying a man in your line of work was a mistake, and I told her she didn't understand you the way I did. And now I'm standing in a room watching you have a conversation about me with a woman wearing your ring, in a language you know I don't speak, and you want me to sit down and be calm about it." The young woman spoke for the first time, in careful, accented English, her chin lifted with a composure that told Amber this was not a surprise to her at all. "You did not know about me." It wasn't a question. "No," Amber said. "I did not know about you." "I am Mirai," the young woman said, as though that settled something. "I have known Junho for 6 years. Since before you." "That's not," Junho started, but Mirai kept talking over him, her composure cracking now into something with an edge to it. "He told me he would end the marriage after the American business dealings were finalized, that the marriage was strategic, that it meant nothing." Mirai's eyes flicked to Amber, not unkind exactly, but not gentle either. "I did not know he was bringing you here. I thought I would meet his mother alone today." The room went very quiet. Amber felt something in her chest that she didn't have a word for yet, something too large and too cold to be simple anger, and underneath it, a strange, clarifying calm, the kind of calm she recognized from every hard moment in her life that had required her to stop feeling and start deciding. "Strategic," Amber repeated. "That's what I am. A strategic marriage." "Amber, let me explain." "You had 4 months," Amber said. 4 months and a plane ride and a hallway conversation to explain, and you chose to let me walk into this room and find out standing up, in front of your mother and your fiancé, like some kind of afterthought you forgot to schedule around." Junho's jaw tightened, the same small hinge tightening she'd seen him do 100 times before difficult conversations with men who owed him money, and for the first time since she'd known him, Amber understood that the stillness she'd once found so magnetic wasn't strength. It was control. And control, she was learning very fast in this room, was not the same thing as honesty. The old woman rose from her chair then, slowly, with the deliberate movement of someone who had spent a lifetime making entrances matter, and crossed the room to stand directly in front of Amber. She was smaller than Amber had expected from the video calls, but she carried herself the way Junho did, the way Amber imagined every person in this family learned to carry themselves before they learned to walk properly, like the room already belonged to them. She studied Amber for a long moment, up and down, An appraisal so nakedly unkind that Amber felt her spine straighten on instinct, the old defensive posture she'd carried since childhood, since every room that had ever looked at her like she took up too much space simply by existing in it. "You are surprised," the old woman said in slow, careful English, the accent thick, but the words precise. "You should not be. My son marries what is useful. He marries who helps the business. Mireille's family controls shipping routes into Busan we have needed for 11 years. She paused, and the pause did more damage than any word could have. You are a green card and a photograph for people who needed to believe my son had softened. That is all you were ever meant to be." "Mother," Junho said, sharp now, the first genuine emotion Amber had heard from him since the doors had opened. "That is enough." "Is it not true?" the old woman said, not looking away from Amber. "Tell her it is not true if you can." Junho didn't answer. He looked, instead, at Amber, and something crossed his face that might have been shame, or might only have been calculation about how to manage the fallout of a scene he had clearly hoped to control better than this, and Amber understood, watching him fail to defend her in the one moment that had ever mattered, exactly how much of the last 2 years of her life had been built on a foundation that had never actually existed. She had flown 19 hours to hear a woman explain, in careful English, precisely how little she had ever meant to any of them. "I need some air," Amber said, and her voice, remarkably, did not shake. "Amber, don't." She held up one hand, and something in the gesture stopped him more completely than shouting would have. "You don't get to follow me right now. You get to stand there and think very carefully about what you're going to say to me later, because right now, if you touch me, I am going to do something in your mother's living room that neither of us will be able to undo." She turned and walked out of the room with her spine straight and her chin level, past security men who did not know what to do with their eyes, out through the hallway hung with photographs she still hadn't looked at, and into the cool evening air of a garden she did not recognize, in a country 11,000 miles from anywhere she had ever called home, and only then did she let herself stop, put both hands on a stone railing, and breathe. She did not cry. She would think about that later. How the tears she'd expected simply didn't come, how in their place was something colder and more useful, something that felt, disturbingly, like clarity. Amber pulled her phone from her bag with hands that had finally, belatedly, begun to shake, and stared at the screen for a long moment before she did the only thing that made sense to her in a garden on the other side of the world. She called her sister, Bianca, who picked up on the second ring because Bianca always picked up, because that was the one thing in Amber's life that had never once been strategic or conditional. "Hey, how's Korea? Did you meet the dragon lady yet?"
Bianca.
Amber's voice cracked on the single word, the first crack she'd allowed herself since the sliding doors had opened. "He has another woman. She's wearing an engagement ring. His mother just told me to my face that I was never anything but a green card." There was a beat of silence on the line, and then Bianca's voice came back low and dangerous in the specific way it always did when someone hurt her sister. "Say that again." Amber told her everything, standing in a garden she didn't know the name of, watching lanterns come on along a stone path as the evening settled over the compound, and by the time she finished, her voice had steadied into something that sounded, even to her own ears, less like grief and more like a woman doing math. "You need to get out of that house," Bianca said.
"Tonight."
"I don't care what it costs. I'll wire you money right now if you need it." "I'm not running," Amber said, surprising herself with how certain the words came out. "Not yet. I want to understand exactly what I walked into before I decide what I'm walking out of." "Amber. I mean it. I didn't fly 19 hours to leave with less information than I came with. If that man thinks he can stand in a room and let his mother humiliate me and then smooth it over with an apology later, he doesn't understand who he married." She hung up before her sister could argue further, and stood alone in the garden a while longer, and when she finally turned back toward the house, she was no longer the woman who had walked out of that room in shock. Something in her had reorganized itself in the last 20 minutes, quietly and completely, the way a house settles after an earthquake, different now, permanently, even if nothing looked different from the outside. She found Junho waiting for her in a small sitting room off the main hallway, alone this time, his mother and Mirai nowhere in sight, his jacket discarded over a chair, and his sleeves rolled up in a way that told her he'd been pacing. Amber. Thank God. I've been. Sit down, she said, and tell me the truth. All of it. Every piece. And if you lie to me even once, I will know, because I have spent 2 years learning exactly what your face does when you're calculating instead of feeling, and I am done being managed by it. Something in his expression cracked at that, not shame exactly, but recognition, the specific look of a man realizing the woman across from him understood him better than he had ever given her credit for. Sit down, Amber said again, quieter now, and this time, Junho sat. He was quiet for a long moment, hands loose between his knees, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried none of the careful stillness he usually wore like armor. Mirai and I were engaged 6 years ago, he said. Before I ever went to Chicago. Her family controls the Busan shipping routes, and the engagement was arranged the way most things in my world are arranged, as a merger disguised as a marriage. I never loved her. I respected her, and I respected what our families needed from each other, but I never loved her. And yet she's still wearing your ring. My mother renewed the arrangement 8 months ago, after I told her I intended to marry you instead. She didn't ask my permission. She simply informed Mirai's family that the engagement remained active, as insurance, in case the American marriage failed to produce what the organization needed from it. His hands tightened against each other. I found out 3 weeks ago. I did not know how to tell you without you assuming exactly what you are assuming right now. I'm not assuming anything, Junho. I'm looking at the evidence directly in front of me. The evidence is my mother's doing, not mine, he said, something raw entering his voice for the first time. I told her I would end it. I told her the day I found out. She said ending it publicly would insult a family we cannot afford to insult, not with the Busan deal still finalizing. She asked for time. I should have told you immediately instead of agreeing to her timeline. That is my failure, and I own it completely. Amber studied him, searching his face for the calculation she'd learned to recognize, and found, unsettlingly, something that looked like genuine regret instead. It didn't make her less angry. It only made the anger more complicated. You let me fly here not knowing, she said. You let me walk into that room and find out standing up, in front of the one woman in this family who's wanted an excuse to dismiss me since day one. Yes, he said simply. And there is no version of explaining that makes it forgivable. I am not going to insult you by trying. The quiet honesty of it landed harder than any defense could have, and Amber sat with it for a long moment, feeling something in her chest twist between two competing truths, that she believed him, and that believing him did not undo a single thing that had happened in that room. There's something else, Junho said, when the silence had stretched long enough that he seemed to feel obligated to fill it. Mirai's older brother, Taeyong, runs security for the Busan side of the operation. He does not know his sister's engagement is arrangement instead of feeling. He believes she loves me, and he has made it clear, more than once, that any humiliation to his family will be answered. Amber felt something cold move through her at that. Meaning what, exactly? Meaning that you walking into that room today and Mirai seeing exactly how little she actually means to my personal choices may have consequences I cannot fully control. Taeyong does not deal in conversations. He deals in messages delivered physically. I need you to stay close to the house until I understand how badly today's scene has damaged things. You want me to stay close? Amber repeated, disbelief sharpening her voice. To the house where your fiancé and your mother just humiliated me, because your fiancé's brother might hurt me if I leave? I want you safe, Junho said. I know how that sounds. It sounds, Amber said, standing now, like I flew 19 hours into a house full of people who see me as a liability to be managed on every possible side of this. Your mother sees me as a mistake she's correcting. Mirai sees me as an obstacle. And now, apparently her brother might see me as a target. And you, she looked at him directly, you saw all of this coming and let me walk in blind anyway. Junho didn't answer, because there was no answer that wouldn't have been another kind of lie, and Amber understood, watching him sit there in his rolled-up sleeves with nothing left to manage his way out of, that whatever she decided to do next, she was going to have to decide it herself, without waiting for him to protect her from a mess he had built with his own silence. She spent that night in a guest room down the hall from the one she was supposed to share with her husband, door locked, sleep refusing to come, replaying the old woman's careful English over and over until the words wore smooth from repetition. You were a green card and a photograph. She thought about her sister's voice on the phone, about the money Bianca had offered without hesitation, about the return flight she could book right now, tonight, and be gone before the house woke. She didn't book it. Some stubborn, furious part of her refused to leave Seoul, having only ever been humiliated in it. If this marriage was ending, and some quiet certain part of her had already decided that it was, she was not going to end it by fleeing in the dark like a woman who had something to be ashamed of. She had done nothing wrong. She intended to leave that house, when she left it, on her own terms, with her dignity fully intact and her eyes open the whole way out. The knock came at just past midnight, soft, and when Amber opened the door with her heart already hammering, she found Mireille standing in the hallway alone, out of the cream dress now, in plain clothes, her composure from earlier entirely gone. I did not know he was married, Mireille said, before Amber could speak, her English rougher now, less careful, the words coming faster than before. I want you to know that. I found out he had a wife 3 weeks ago, the same time you say you found out about me. His mother told me it did not matter, that the engagement was still binding regardless. Amber studied her for a long moment, anger and something unexpectedly like recognition moving through her at once. You're telling me we're in the same position. I am telling you, Mireille said, that my brother does not know any of this. He believes I am happily engaged to a man who loves me. If he learns the truth, that I am being used the same as you, that this family has been managing both of us like pieces on a board, he will not direct his anger at his own sister's humiliation quietly. He will direct it at whoever he believes caused it. And right now, the woman in this house he does not know yet is you. So, what are you telling me? To leave? I am telling you, Mireille said, glancing back down the dark hallway with real fear crossing her face for the first time, that Taeyong is already on his way here. Someone in the house told him about the scene in the living room, and men in his position do not wait for explanations before they act. You should not be alone in this house tonight. Amber felt the cold certainty of real danger settle into her chest, sharp and clarifying, the same clean fear she imagined every soldier and every survivor eventually learned to use instead of being used by. Where is Junho? With his mother, arguing, from what I could hear.
Mireille's mouth tightened.
He does not know Taeyong is already moving. I came to you first because you are the one with the least protection in this house, and because whatever else is true, none of what happened today was your doing. Amber didn't wait to feel grateful or suspicious of the warning. She moved, grabbing her phone and her shoes, mind already working through the compound's layout the way she'd cataloged it without meaning to on the walk-in earlier that day. The garden exit, the security positions, the long driveway that led to the gate. She was not going to stand in a hallway and wait to find out what an angry man with a security detail intended to do about a humiliation that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with a family that had used her as a placeholder. Help me find Junho, Amber said.
Now.
They found him in his mother's study, mid-argument, the old woman's voice sharp and unbending even in a language Amber didn't understand, and the moment Junho saw Mireille's face, and then Amber standing beside her, some instinct trained by years of exactly this kind of danger snapped him instantly out of the argument. Taeyong is coming, Mireille said in Korean first then English for Amber's benefit. Someone told him what happened. He is not calling first. Junho's expression went cold and still in a way Amber had seen exactly once before, the night he'd handled a debt dispute over the phone in their kitchen in Chicago with a voice so flat it had frightened her more than shouting would have. How long, he said. 15 minutes. Maybe less. He turned to Amber immediately. You need to be somewhere secure.
Now.
No, Amber said, and the word came out with more force than she expected. cutting through the room's rising panic. I'm done being moved around this house like a piece of furniture nobody consulted. If a man is coming here angry because his sister was humiliated by a marriage none of us actually consented to being trapped inside, then I want to be in the room when it happens. I want him to hear directly from me that I had nothing to do with any of it, instead of finding out secondhand and deciding for himself what I deserve. Amber, he is not a reasonable man when he is angry. Neither was your mother earlier today, Amber said, and I survived that room standing on my own 2 feet. I can survive this one too. The old woman said something sharp from her chair, and this time Mireille answered her directly, voice hard, clearly done deferring to a woman who had spent 6 years managing her future, without her consent, and whatever she said made the old woman go silent for the first time since Amber had walked into this house. The sound of cars in the driveway reached them a few minutes later, tires loud on gravel, and Junho moved toward the study door with the same economical, lethal calm Amber had seen him carry into every crisis she'd ever watched him face, except this time, she stepped forward and moved with him instead of waiting behind. Taeyong came through the front entrance flanked by 2 men, expensive suit, face carved into an expression of controlled fury that reminded Amber uncomfortably of his sister's composure from earlier that day. The same family training worn on a different face. Where's she? Taeyong said, in clipped English, clearly for Amber's benefit, clearly meaning to make sure she understood every word of what came next. The woman who humiliated my sister in front of the whole family. That would be me, Amber said, stepping fully into view before Junho could answer for her. And before you say another word, you should know I didn't humiliate anyone. I found out today, in that living room, that my husband has been engaged to your sister for 6 years, renewed 8 months ago without either of our knowledge or consent, by a woman sitting right there who decided both our lives were hers to arrange. She gestured toward the old woman without looking away from Taeyong's face. Your sister and I are not enemies here. We're both the same kind of collateral damage. Taeyong's jaw tightened, and for a moment Amber thought the calm assessment in her voice had made things worse instead of better, watching his hand twitch toward his jacket in a motion she recognized instantly from every warning Junho had ever given her about men in this world. Daeyoung. Mireille's voice cut through the room, sharp, stepping fully between her brother and Amber before anyone else could move. She is telling the truth. I confirmed it myself. Our engagement was never real to me, not since the day I learned he loved someone else. I have been trapped in it the same as she has. If you want to be angry at someone for what happened in that room today, be angry at the woman who arranged both our lives without asking either of us. She turned, deliberately, to face the old woman directly. Be angry at her. The room went utterly silent, the old woman's composed face flickering, for the first time all day, into something like genuine alarm. Taeyong looked between his sister and the old woman for a long, dangerous moment, and Amber watched something shift in his expression, the controlled fury redirecting itself away from her entirely, settling instead onto the small, upright figure in the high-backed chair who had spent the whole day treating 2 women's lives as instruments to be arranged and rearranged for the family's convenience. Is this true? He said to his sister, quieter now in English, as though he needed Amber and Junho to witness the answer as much as he needed to hear it himself. Yes, Mireille said. Every word. Taeyong turned to the old woman, and whatever he said next was in Korean, low and furious, and the old woman's careful composure cracked fully open for the first time since Amber had walked into this house, her sharp replies growing thinner and less certain as her nephew's anger filled the room instead of Amber's. Amber didn't wait to see how the argument between the 2 families resolved itself. She had learned everything she needed to know in that living room hours earlier, and everything since had only confirmed it, that she had married into a family that saw wives and fiancés alike as currency to be spent when convenient, and that the man she'd married had known enough, for long enough, to have told her the truth before she ever boarded a plane. She turned to Junho, who was watching the unraveling argument with an expression she couldn't fully read, and waited until his eyes found hers. I'm going home, she said. Not the house in Chicago. Home. Wherever that ends up being, it's not going to be a place where your mother decides what I'm worth. Amber. You had 3 weeks to tell me the truth, she said, steady now, the steadiness that had carried her through the worst day of her marriage settling into something that felt, finally, like her own decision instead of a reaction to someone else's. You chose silence instead, and let me find out standing in your mother's living room. I understand why you did it. I even believe you when you say you didn't want it to be true. But understanding isn't the same as forgiving, and I'm done confusing the two. What do you want me to do? Junho said, and for the first time all day, his careful stillness had entirely abandoned him, something raw and afraid showing through in its place. I want you to let me leave this house tonight, Amber said, with my dignity and without anyone in your family deciding they get a say in how I go. That's all I want from you right now. Everything else, we can figure out from 11,000 miles away, when I'm not standing in a room that's spent all day telling me I don't matter. He didn't argue. Something in his face told her he understood, finally and completely, that arguing would only prove every accusation she'd made correct. Mireille found her in the driveway 20 minutes later, waiting for the car that would take her to the airport, the night air cool and quiet after the storm of the last several hours. For what it's worth, Mireille said, I am sorry. Not for the ring. For not warning you sooner. I did not know how, or if you would believe me. I believe you now, Amber said. What are you going to do? Leave the engagement, Mireille said, and something like relief moved across her face as she said it, like the sentence had been waiting a long time to be spoken aloud. My brother will make sure the family understands it is over, on my terms this time, not theirs. I am tired of being useful to people who never once asked if I wanted to be. Then we've got that in common, Amber said, and for a moment, standing in a dark driveway on the other side of the world, two women who had spent a single terrible day discovering exactly how little they had ever mattered to the people who claimed to love them, found something unexpectedly like solidarity in the wreckage. The car arrived. Amber got in without looking back at the house, its windows lit gold against the dark like something out of a story she no longer wanted any part of, and watched Seoul blur past the glass one more time, the city no less beautiful for everything it had cost her to see it this way. She didn't cry on the flight home either. Somewhere over the Pacific, phone in her lap, she opened a blank document and began, slowly and deliberately, to write down everything she wanted from the life she was about to rebuild. Not a list of demands for Junho, not yet a decision about divorce papers or lawyers or the house in Chicago that still had half her clothes in its closets, but a list for herself. The first honest accounting she'd given her own wants in longer than she could easily remember. At the top of the list, she wrote one line and stared at it until the plane began its slow descent toward home. I get to decide what I'm worth. Not them. Me. She closed the laptop, leaned her head against the window, and watched the lights of an ocean she'd crossed twice in 3 days spread out beneath her, and felt, for the first time since the sliding doors had opened onto a stranger wearing her ring, something that was not quite peace, but was, unmistakably, the beginning of it.